Over the past year, we've started to see science being rewritten right before our eyes. And the question is, why does science need to be rewritten? Why do scientific-based terminologies need to be changed? Because when you start to change terminology and start to change science, you basically start to distort reality. And if we know things are factual because of years and years of research and evidence, why all of a sudden are we starting to change them with no evidence that they need to be changed? In this article by the Epoch Times, the World Health Organization is who they're talking about, and they changed the definition of herd immunity. Public health policies, public perception potentially affected as the terminology changes. Why would all of a sudden the definition of herd immunity need to be changed? Let's go ahead and take a look at what they're talking about here. Now, herd immunity, let's look at the original definition. Herd immunity is the indirect protection from an infectious disease that happens when a population is immune either through vaccination or, and I want you to really pay attention to this part, immunity developed through previous infection, okay? That's a very important piece right there. So we have two ways to develop herd immunity: vaccination, or you get the infection and enough people get the infection and then you can develop herd immunity from it. Now, this is the old school definition. This is the one that was previously on their website. And now, here's the new one. Here's the new school herd immunity definition. Herd immunity, also known as population immunity, is a concept used for vaccination, in which a population can be protected from a certain virus if a threshold of vaccination is reached. Herd immunity is achieved by protecting people from a virus, not by exposing them to it. Okay, so it's a very different approach. You don't want to expose them to it, you want to protect them, clearly using a vaccination. Vaccinations train our immune system to create proteins to fight disease, known as antibodies, just as would happen when we're exposed to a disease, but crucially, vaccines work without making us sick. Vaccinated people are protected from getting the disease in question, passing it on, breaking any chains of transmission. Okay, so if we look at this new definition, what did it leave out? It left out the fact that immunity is developed through previous infection. And now the way that herd immunity is looked at through the World Health Organization is it can only be achieved if you get a vaccination. Pretty interesting when you really look at what's behind the World Health Organization and what they stand for. Very interesting. And it's so dangerous to start changing these definitions because you're starting to just rewrite science here. Let me tell you a little story. The other day, there was a gentleman that he was talking to me about COVID. He was wildly concerned. I mean, quite frankly, he was under the impression if he gets COVID, he's going to die. And that's just the way it was going to be. Well, I don't like to be a doomsday kind of guy. I don't like to be a negative Nancy. So I thought to myself, let me try to have a little bit of an uplifting conversation here. And I started talking about some of the positives that are happening. And, they're looking at herd immunity. And there's a huge benefit to, the people who are getting it and, developing some antibodies against it. And, the thing is about this conversation is that it was meant to be uplifting. Everything was going real well, and then all hell broke loose. I mentioned the word herd immunity, and he literally lost it. He exclaimed loudly, "Herd immunity is BS." And he said, of course, the whole word. We're in a professional setting, for goodness sake. And when I was put in this position, I really was kind of thrown off guard because I was not expecting it, especially from this individual. My main goal at that point was to extinguish the conversation and move on, and that's exactly what I did. But it was really interesting to me because I thought to myself, what in the world just happened? I mean, here I am in a professional setting, and all of a sudden, this gentleman gets loud with me and yells that herd immunity is BS. Why would somebody say that? I mean, I went to school for a long time. We learned about herd immunity. We were tested even at a board level about herd immunity. Why would somebody say that? And then you come across an article like this that basically says, well, of course herd immunity is BS because the vaccination wasn't available to all these people. So you can't possibly have herd immunity without vaccination. So we see the dangers in this, and now we can see that people are already thinking, well, this is what herd immunity is, people who don't know any better. And we also are going to see the generations from here on out start to believe that herd immunity comes from vaccinations. Now, very interesting. I want you to hold this thought because we're going to move on, because this isn't the only thing that's had the flip switched on. Let's go ahead and take a look at a research article. COVID-19 data collection, comorbidity, and federal law, a historical retrospective. Okay, I want to just get to the nuts and bolts of this here piece of research, because this is actually a really solid piece of evidence. It's being used in many lawsuits throughout the country, because they basically are looking at the numbers for COVID and saying they're not quite right, and why are we doing this? So if we get to the nuts and bolts of this, basically what this article is saying, what this research article is saying, is that the newly adopted fatality reporting guidelines on March 24th, 2020 enabled COVID-19 to be listed as a primary cause of death on death certificates, regardless of the pre-existing comorbidities. Remember that. This is not how fatality reporting has been conducted for the past 17 years. So basically what that says, if we were to break it down, is that COVID-19 is being listed as the main cause of death, even when it's not the main cause of death. Get hit by a bus, COVID-19 if you tested positive. End-stage cancer, and they test you for COVID-19, bam, you died of COVID-19. Heart attack, they test you for COVID-19, well, bam, there it was. And this isn't how death has been recorded for the past 17 years. They just changed it March 24th, 2020. Prior to that, what would happen is if you were in end-stage cancer and you died, well, they would say, you know what, this person had end-stage cancer, that was the primary cause of death, okay? But, a secondary cause of death, well, this person developed a bacterial infection, or this person developed pneumonia, or maybe this person had this heart attack, which was the primary cause of death, but secondary is we found that he had COVID-19. But when you just label everything as COVID-19, you can see that that changes the numbers dramatically. Let's go on and look at another key point here. Now, the key point is these newly adopted fatality reporting guidelines were illegally created by the CDC in the issuance of a fatality reporting guidelines to physicians, medical examiners, and coroners. The CDC violated U.S. Federal Law 44 U.S.C. 3501-3506 and bypassed the Information Quality Act and the oversight of the Office of Management Budget, which is basically how federal agencies collect and disseminate data. They just kind of, bypassed those guys and said, we're doing this thing here. Okay, so there's a lot of crazy things here. And when I read this, one of the first terms that came to my mind when I saw this stuff is I just thought of the term gaslighting, right? Because you're seeing these things being switched and you're like, well, no, that's not how it is. But according to these, I guess according to what they're saying, it is how it is. Gaslighting is basically sowing doubt to an individual, making them question their own memory, creating low self-esteem, using misinformation to destabilize and delegitimize the victim's belief. I mean, when I look at this stuff, I go, no, that's not how it was. And luckily, we have the Wayback Machine that can take us way back to when we can see these other definitions and we can see the other ways that they used to report deaths. And now we're seeing these. I put in the comments below what you think of all this. I mean, it's not me making this stuff up. It's right here. It's evidence before your eyes. You can go look all this stuff up. Now, when you start to really put this whole picture together and you look at the fact that they're changing things, the definitions of like herd immunity, and they're over here, changing the way that they're reporting deaths, and then, a lot of these hospital systems and physicians are being financially incentivized to basically label somebody as COVID-19 because they'll make more money if the death is from a COVID-19. And you look at that, and then you look at the false negatives and the false positives coming out of these PCR and antigen tests. I mean, how does anybody make heads or tails of this situation? And especially, how does a government agency go in and start to make rules around this information when this is what's happening? Put your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think of this.